This is Pretty Much Pop, a culture podcast, and our best cast is undoubtedly the current one. Today we're talking about Saturday Night Live in light of its 50th anniversary and the streaming release of Jason Reitman's film Saturday Night about the launch of the show. This is Mark Linsenmeyer. Went okay in the table read on Tuesday, but ultimately cut for time.
This is Al Baker, and I only had a week to write this bit, so you shouldn't expect too much of it.
I'm Sarahlyn Breck, and even though I'm in my 5th decade, I'm arguably still relevant.
This is Lawrence Ware, and I just want to say, hello, boys and girls. The word for today is pain.
Well, we delayed this, so the 50th anniversary thing should come out. Then we delayed an extra week because some people were sick. And now I'm sick, but we're doing it anyway. I wanted to delay no more. Delay no more. The show must go on.
I want the listener to know that I was the one who was sick, and I stopped the train. But Mark is so much better of a podcaster than me. He is going through, man. We're going in despite the sickness.
Soldiering through.
Mark. Thank you so much, Mark, for showing me how I should be. Thank you, sir.
Are there shows where Kristen Wiig or John Belushi or whoever shows up talking in an octave lower than they normally do because they have a cold? Or do they just write them out of sketches? Do they just...
No, I'm sure they probably do.
Surely one of the benefits of having at least 3 times bigger of a cast than you actually need on a show like that is that there are people ready to step in the event of sniffles.
That's true. And they probably also, in any showbiz environment, they have people ready to pump you up with drugs.
When it comes to SNL, my understanding is that they were more than capable of pumping themselves up.
Here's a shot of something just to get you through the next hour and a half, and then you will sleep for a while.
Even if it's just emergency.
And that shot is cocaine. That's what that shot is.
Yeah. So let me start by establishing my outsider status. Obviously, I'm familiar with Saturday Night Live, but it is an institution in America in a way that it's not over here. But one of the things that I think that I know about Saturday Night Live is that every cast is high always through the entire run of the show. Every decade, like, people come out and say, oh, it used to be like that in the previous decade, but now everything's calmed down. But it seems like that's happened too many decades in a row for that not just to be like the condition of the show.
I should tell you my origin. So this was floating around when I was young in the 70s, but my first time sort of that I recall watching it live and sort of making a commitment, I'm going to get on board this train, was the premiere episode of season 6. Do you know what season 6 is? Season 6 is when all the original cast went away. One of the worst casts ever launched. So
is that the one that's infamously the worst season that they all apologized for the year after?
No, that was like season 10 when Lorne Michaels came back. There's a special on Peacock about the weird season, but I also saw that season. I was definitely in the loop because I was all, Anthony Michael Hall, like, ooh, okay, he was so bad on the show and they knew it. But yes, I remember very clearly, maybe I didn't even see the whole show, but I remember like a commercial from the beginning of like a fake airline commercial. It's like driving in a cattle car with dirt. Like that was the punchline.
Oh my.
I was a little disappointed that there was no Bill Murray. So clearly I had seen bits of things before, but it's only been when streaming came back. And I find myself that when I'm just like looking at random stuff on YouTube, I will watch SNL clips. I've been doing that for a couple of years, but I had not until this effort here. And, we knew we were going to do this entire season since September, since August. Mm-hmm. So I've been trying to keep up with this season and going back a little bit, but mostly, just see on YouTube the next day, the political sketch about the debate or something like that. So I had some idea of who the cast members had been, but there's just so much that I have missed. Whereas I feel like I was a pretty faithful watcher during the Chris Farley era, during the era before that, even back to Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo. Mm-hmm. I got through all that stuff. And they're on the Comedy Channel. They had reruns or best ofs from the original cast. So I feel like I saw a lot of those individual sketches, but it was still kind of threw me. I got the box set of season 1 a few years ago for Christmas, and I did not get through it. I watched a couple episodes and I'm like, this is actually unwatchable. And I found this time going back to try to watch some of those old episodes, like I enjoyed the ones from 15 years ago, but the ones from the first bunch of seasons, like it's kind of interminable.
Do you think that's because comedy doesn't really age very well? Or do you think it's because it was just kind of bad? Because I remember watching all of those early shows and reruns. That was how I watched the early Saturday Night Live episodes. And I thought they were hilarious, but it could have been because I was 10, or 15. Maybe my comedy taste wasn't as well developed. But I kind of agree with you, Mark. I feel like the era that is probably my favorite was like when Tina Fey was writing and we had all of those, Maya Rudolph and Amy Poehler, and that whole crew might be my favorite, just objectively from a comedy standpoint. But yeah, going back to those old episodes, maybe it's because it's from so long ago, I'm just not really getting those jokes, or maybe it's just genuinely not funny.
I want to hear Lawrence's background on here before we muse on these things.
Me too.
I mean, I did not grow up watching the actual shows. That's not how I grew up watching these shows. I mean, I wasn't too young. I don't know why. I just didn't grow up watching the shows. My introduction to Saturday Night Live, I don't even know if you guys remember this, but they used to advertise, how do I describe these? Like they would compile segments of certain Saturday Night Live actors. And then they would sell those compilations to people. So what I grew up watching was the Eddie Murphy compilation of Saturday Night Lives. Or I grew up watching Chris Rock's compilation of Saturday Night Live performances. Or even a little bit later on, started watching some Tracy Morgan Saturday Night Live compilations. And then one of my favorite, honestly, was Tim Meadows. Because I said way before we started the podcast, I started talking like Tim Meadows did in The Ladies' Man. Because that, for me, was incredibly hilarious. Like his little lisp and how just vile he was. Like, hey, ladies. Like that was something that I grew up really kind of loving. So I never really watched the episodes. To this day, I really don't watch the episodes. I don't watch the musical guests. That's not what I like. What I like is people to curate for me the best of them. So I went back and watched some Steve Martin, for example. Mark sent us a text saying, hey, Steve Martin's talking to Lawrence. He's talking about, stop, have more joy in your heart or whatever the hell he said.
This was his opening monologue of the 50th, just to refer people.
Yeah, it was in the last 5 minutes, and he like did his little aside, and he looked at the camera, and he's like, maybe you don't like what I'm saying. Maybe you don't have joy in your heart. And I didn't like that Mark zeroed me out, because it's not true. But here's the thing. I went back and I watched some clips of Steve Martin on Saturday Night Live. Dude was amazing. He was really incredibly good. And so what that says to me is that I'm more along the lines, I really like people to clip things out. To this day, I still enjoyed like clips of the 50th. I couldn't watch the entire 50th, but I enjoyed certain clips that were like highlights. So for example, whenever they're doing the Scared Straight thing and Eddie Murphy's there and then Will Ferrell shows up towards the end, it's kind of shocking how he almost makes everybody laugh. Like that's what I enjoyed. And so that was my entryway to Saturday Night Live. And to this day, it remains some of the best comedy, like little sketches. Now it doesn't rise to the level of like In Living Color for me, because that's really where my heart is. But it is really, really good. And I give it all the respect for being the originator of giving me those kind of things that Key and Peele later jumped on and kind of did their thing with it. And In Living Color came and jumped on and did their thing with it. And All That, for example, was a show that came on Nickelodeon that I love, that jumped on and did their thing with it. So I give it mad respect for being the originator of that kind of form as far as I know.
So this is where it might be interesting for me to go into a bit more of my background with SNL, because I've got a huge background in sketch comedy. There's a really long tradition of sketch comedy in the UK. Even sketch comedy which is produced on a weekly cadence and is like topical, or is in any case written, rehearsed and performed all within a very short space of time. But I don't think that there is anything else quite like SNL. So it was interesting when you said, Lawrence, that the SNL like created all of these or like informed all of these other kind of sketch comedy groups. Mm-hmm. But sketch comedy goes back a long way before SNL.
Interesting.
Certainly Monty Python, they said, like, was one of their primary influences when they started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we talk about the history of sketch comedy, it comes from like review shows that universities used to put on, and it's like skits and sketches and whatever else. But when it was televised, I think the first televised, so there were radio sketch shows, and then I think the first televised sketch show would have been maybe Spike Milligan. There was one called Weekending, which ran on the BBC for a really long time. The comedians who were on it used to famously call it, let's say it was called weekending because every sketch had a week ending. Certainly nothing in the UK, I don't think, ever comes close to quite being what SNL is, which after, watching a bunch of it and thinking about it, I think really the key to SNL is that they make every element of it much, much harder than it has to be. I've been wrestling with the question about, like, is SNL funny? Like, over the last few weeks, that seems to me to be the $1 million question, because it is wildly inconsistent in quality. And if you're just watching sketches, you can watch 5 or 6 before you even get anything approaching like an organic laugh coming out of yourself.
But that one is so funny, though.
Well, it can be. But what's amazing about SNL is that, like, compared to any other sketch show, which are mostly, even if they're recorded live to camera, they're edited, right? If they're recorded live to camera, you get multiple takes. And, maybe they're topical and whatever. But SNL does, like, okay, we're going to write and record the show in a week. We're going to do it live to camera. And we're going to put ourselves forward as, like, the funniest thing on TV. And so you're shooting for these 3 incredibly difficult things that are really hard to pull off together. And that's really remarkable because it kind of explains why SNL is so beloved, even though the output is so inconsistent. Because everyone is just willing them on to do this impossible thing. So in the end, it really feels like it doesn't matter all that much that not all the sketches are very funny, because everybody knows that they're playing on hard mode, and it just feels like you're watching a sport more than a comedy show sometimes.
That's such a good point.
Perceptive point.
My thesis for the episode is that we, as a culture, and I in particular, have been taking this institution for granted. That as probably inarguable that the greatest product of it is the cast selection and the introduction of these people into subsequent films, TV shows. So many of them have gone on to, be Chris Rock. Didn't actually make that big of splash, was not actually that funny on the show, I think. He says this himself. I always felt when I saw him that he sort of had dead eyes, but he's so much funnier now, and he's become such an institution. I was sort of surprised in going back through which cast members I didn't remember. Like that there are always some. Like, oh, I don't even know that person's name from 1983 or something like that. It really was just Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo and a couple women. And then like, oh, there was other people on the show. Maybe because they didn't make that big of a splash. But when a new Jason Sudeikis project comes out or a Kristen Wiig project comes out, I will probably watch it because these are wonderfully funny people. But yet there's this, hasn't been really readily available until just recently with Hulu and now Peacock having everything at your disposal. I feel like, wow, there's all this material that these, that Will Ferrell, that these hilarious people were on that I did not feel was worth my time. I did not feel I should even stay up and there's so much effort went into this thing that, geez, and it's not even just the cast. It's also the writers. Right. Even though they're playing on hard mode, even though it went through a pretty difficult gauntlet. Every sketch, even though it might have seemed lame to you, generated laughs and pushed out 3 other sketches that wanted that spot. So the fact that there was this thing designed as well as it could to produce high quality material with such wonderful people. And I have mostly been like, well, I'll watch the first 15 minutes and then it probably drops off. It's like a newspaper. You just read the beginning, you read the first paragraph of the stories. It's even constructed to be taken in like that. Yeah. I feel like I've been doing a disservice, and in preparation for this, I sort of went on, I just watched, like, Peacock has these, like, all the Will Ferrell Celebrity Jeopardy sketches. There are 11 of them. And I just watched all of them in a row, and they were all good. And the Andy Samberg pre-recorded, right? Not live, of course. He did like 50 of those things. And they're almost all good. So you could just get on YouTube and just disappear into this thing.
But those are all sandwiched into episodes that were, really hit and miss. And I don't know, I was just reading this article about Lorne Michaels in the New York Times about how he has this eye for talent. If that's what his legacy, other than SNL, it's going to be how many comedy superstars he has really shepherded into our culture. But at the same time, Al, you're so right. Like this show is not very efficient, because you have a week to come up with, I don't know how many sketches they end up on air. Is it a dozen sketches? Is it that many sketches? Maybe 8 sketches?
It's probably closer to a dozen out of 30 or 40. I think they said they do 35
like
at the Tuesday read.
Yes. And so they will whittle that down by 2/3. So they are writing too many sketches. They'll whittle it down to 1/3 of those sketches that are supposedly the best. And then often those sketches are, again, hit and miss. I just wonder, like when he leaves the show, is it ever going to be the machine? Can it be the machine without him at the helm?
It's so interesting because in many ways, it is a really horrible way to produce a show because you are putting this cast of people and you're putting the writers and the cast of people through this horrible process every week. And I made a joke about how large the cast was, but it is true. Like there are cast members who go whole seasons without ever being on camera, right? And there are many, many writers in the writer's room who go multiple seasons without anything they've written making it to air. And Lorne Michaels has created this, like, what's the word? What's the amazing movie, Lawrence, where all the Japanese kids get put on an island and murder themselves, murder each other? Or was it Hunger Games?
Squid Game?
Squid Game.
No, it wasn't Squid Games. I forgot. I know what you're talking about. Keep going. I'll tell you.
The Hunger Games is a more relatable reference. But anyway, it's a big rumble in the jumble, right? Every single week. And it's like, no wonder they've all got like drug problems and self-esteem issues.
Battle Royale.
Battle Royale. That's the one. It's a Battle Royale. And it's really, really brutal. And you're absolutely right, Mark, that one of the most important things about SNL clearly is that it has become the way that America identifies great comedic talent. Like if you want to be a great comedy star, you kind of have to go through the SNL pipeline or go through like a couple of like weird back alley. Like what are the big comedy names that recently that didn't come up through SNL? There are hardly
Key and Peele,
any.
I don't think Key and Peele did.
Didn't Key and Peele?
No.
Oh, I thought they did.
The Daily Show. The Daily Show is another one that has minted some superstars that I think many of them also tried out for SNL and didn't make it in.
It's SNL or Comedy Central.
It's Stephen Colbert's audition and Zach Galifianakis' audition, etc.
However, I think that Al's point is right, that it is the primary way that people kind of get mainstream. Go ahead, Al.
One of the things that I came away from this last week thinking was that it explains an awful lot about the state of American comedy. The fact that SNL is so dominant because it's produced like directly, even those shows which don't have a huge amount to do with SNL, like The Office, still the style of comedy that drives so many like American sitcoms and so much stand-up and especially American movies these days is so based in the quick short form sketch comedy / improv genre of comedy, especially the hyper dominance of like the big comedy character actor like Will Ferrell or Jack Black. And I don't think, was Jack Black in SNL? But he's like in that vein. So just like the way to be a comedy star is very much shaped by like SNL's way of doing things, which in turn is shaped by this incredibly flying by the seat of your pants, intense, competitive, like game-like atmosphere. And I think it just explains an awful lot about why American comedy, so much of it is the way that it is.
Greg Daniels, creator of The Office, was a writer for SNL, as of was Bob Odenkirk and Conan O'Brien, and Larry David, and
I think it was Sarah who said that oftentimes these are crap sandwich episodes. I think it was exactly her verbiage. But nevertheless, I want to make sure that I capture exactly what you said. I don't want to misquote you. But the point, nevertheless, though, is that that's the reason why the vast majority of people now, they look for the clips. They go on YouTube after the episode. They don't watch it live. Like maybe the 50th anniversary celebration was watched live by a great deal of people. But the vast majority of the people who are in my classes, my students, my children, they don't watch it live. They go on YouTube sometimes hours later, oftentimes the next day to see what were the highlights. Because the people who are doing the YouTube clips are looking at the actual episode and they're saying, okay, this is really good. Let's clip this. And so I think that moving forward, that's probably going to be the way that this is going to, because many episodes as episodes are not quite good, but there are oftentimes like little diamonds throughout these little episodes that you want to pull out and remember forever. And so list of great episodes have always kind of underwhelmed me of SNL. but lists of great sketches have always been wonderful. And so I think that moving forward, Al, to your point, that if he leaves, as long as you're able to kind of do some really good segments, I think it'll be fine. I don't think it will kind of die off. The question will be, will he leave a good enough legacy and a good enough group of individuals who can keep up that high quality sketches? Because it's not the episodes that need to be great. It needs to be the sketches. And I think that it absolutely can happen. I don't think that it needs to die off necessarily without him. Now you may not have the great talent, because he does have an eye for talent, an unbelievable eye for talent. Some of those guys are complete misses, but a lot of them are hits. And so that will be what you fall off. But I think that the sketches could be okay.
Mm-hmm.
I disagree entirely. I think that the
shocking we're disagreeing. Al.
No, but kind of picking up on similar points though, because you're absolutely right. The way people watch SNL now is individual sketch by sketch, but that means that the low quality of the sketches is less forgivable because you're not watching the whole thing as a live experience, right?
Yeah.
So you need to, if the way people are going to be watching SNL is watching these highlight sketches, then the way to be good at that is to make these sketches as good as possible. But SNL is not set up in a way where you're going to get a great sketch every week. What is set up in a way to get a higher than average set of sketches very quickly.
But TV isn't overall. I mean, you hear this about like all the late night shows, like The Tonight Show, which is also produced by Lorne Michaels, and the Seth Meyers Show. They're also watched in clip form.
Absolutely.
The way that we watch TV has changed so dramatically that we're not even watching it necessarily on TVs anymore. We're watching it on our phones or on our iPads. So I don't have an answer for how that's going to affect how this show moves forward, because I know that the way that I watched it when I was closer in age to those who were performing in it was live at 11:30, and I would watch the entire thing. And then that was the discussion as what worked and what didn't the next day.
You were a late night East Coast gal. Us Central Time people had an easier time of it. 10:30 is not as crazy as the young person.
Much easier.
No, I grew up on the West
She's
Coast.
in California. Yeah, she's in
and
California.
then I was also in Chicago for a while in my 20s when actually most of my friends desperately wanted to audition for Saturday Night Live. But it was something that we watched live,
She's a Cali girl. That's right. I forgot about that.
I thought it was at least delayed on the West Coast.
It was delayed. Yeah, it was delayed
Okay.
on the West Coast.
The format in the way that it was originally envisioned of like, this is nightlife in New York and you're taking part of it. It's almost like, a few times I've gone to a comedy show. It's so much funnier seeing the stand-up comic in person than it is seeing them on TV.
Totally.
Like it's infectious. You're there. So this was a vicarious way of we're all watching this at the same time. They're reacting to the news in a very sudden way, both in let's put together a sketch of this debate that happened yesterday and let's throw this together and come up with these impersonations, come up with the costumes and stuff and do this. So it's a real national experience. But yes, as live TV itself has gone down, I just wonder, like, as this is comparable to, people don't listen to albums anymore. They just go on Spotify and they listen to one song. And,
That's right.
and usually so much effort is gone into creating a symphony with the album progression of the songs. And and I have thoughts about, this is, especially when it was LPs. So it's only like 5 songs per side and like what the role of each song is supposed to be in that order. So I still will put, you put a really dramatic one as the last one or the second to last one. And you got to think about your first 3 in a very, so is there something comparable going on with SNL that we're, by not just watching the show the way it was intended, that we're missing, including the music, which I was never super into. I would leave.
Yeah, I wasn't either.
It's like I'm not in the
Yeah.
but
Wow.
as a dramatic thing, like if you're watching live, having a break from the laughs to like recharge and take in this other form, like absolutely makes sense.
It's needed. It's necessary.
Oh, I love the music portion.
On TV, it was not very good to me. I mean, there were oftentimes acts that I cared about because of the acts. But man, come on, Sarah. That music was okay.
Oh, are you kidding me? I thought it was so exciting because so often, at least God, I'm dating myself, but when I was in college, you know, in the 90s, those were the acts that were the up and coming rock stars. You know, I remember for a brief while, I dated a guy who was a music journalist. I went to college in LA and we would go into Hollywood and watch, you know, up and coming acts that are now old timey acts. And then we would figure out when are they going to be on SNL. So we would go see them first at a little club. And then, you know, 2 weeks later, Camper Van Beethoven or something would be on SNL, which was really, really exciting. And I still actually really like a lot of the musical acts on SNL, but it doesn't feel like it's the same kind of vehicle as it once was. It feels like we've got already established stars that are, you know, appearing. Do you feel that way? Does that track for you guys? Maybe I'm just not watching as much.
I thought it was just that we were old, and that's why I don't connect with the new people.
I mean, speak for yourself. I don't know about this. We are old.
Comedy is timeless in a way that music is very generational.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we were just talking about comedy getting old as well. And the experience that we have, if you actually try to watch things from many seasons ago, it's definitely does not get the full effect, especially the news sections.
To be sure.
And I don't want to relive like people complaining about the
Star Report. I don't know. What do people make jokes about?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Do we need to go back to
Stuff. Yeah.
Monica Lewinsky jokes and stuff? No.
Ross Perot.
No.
Like, I don't need to hear about that guy anymore. I mean, but it's interesting, you know, as a historical document.
But in the moment, it's really, really good. Like they're really good on being on top of that in the moment. But yeah, it doesn't age. Like that's like watching old episodes of Last Week Tonight or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much better in the moment than much later. So those kind of segments don't work well for me. But going back, and I know Mark is probably going to ask us this at some point, but one of the things I really enjoyed that I didn't know about was word association. The word association sketch with, I believe it was Richard Pryor, and it must have been Chevy Chase.
Chevy Chase, yeah.
That was so incredibly funny to me. And that's what, 70s?
Yep.
It's many, many decades ago. Incredibly funny. So there are things that age well with that they're doing. There are other things that don't age as well, but nevertheless, like it's a hit or miss thing. It depends upon what they're trying to go for, what they're trying to hit. Some of the things that they're going to try to hit are going to be very contemporaneous. It's a joke that happens because what's happening in the news, what happened last week. But there are other things that they're doing that are far more timeless, and those things are the things that really, really have a great deal of staying power.
Do you think, though, that that's what we're going to be thinking about as SNL's legacy? Are those moments, or are we going to think more in terms of the star power of the cast and the writers?
Great question.
Who knows? Will Phil Hartman be lost to history because most of what he did was on this show? And he's so wonderful. And
he was
added so much to everything that he would read.
He was so great.
Yeah.
I have him on my top 10.
So, like, if people are not pulling up Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer 40 years from now, I will be very surprised. I think these things will live on. Like, who's on first? Like, there's many versions of that.
For me, what it's going to be is the cast members, because those cast members, they're oftentimes associated with some of the greatest sketches, right? So Will Ferrell, Kristen Wiig, Eddie Murphy. I'm going to disagree with you, Mark. I really like Chris Rock, and maybe it's me looking at him through the lens of who he is now and looking back on that. Maybe that's what's going on with me. But nevertheless, like it's going to be the cast members that really kind of stick with me. Maya Rudolph, it's going to be those individuals and what they did, not necessarily the sketches. For me, the sketches don't transcend the talent. The talent are the ones who are able to bring the sketches up to a particular kind of level. And so that's really what's going to stick with me for a very long time.
I really agree. I think it's the talent. I think SNL will be remembered as the petri dish of American comedy talent. Because if you mentioned who's on first, and I think it was like, what is my favorite SNL sketches? Maybe we would do like a list, but it would be, something like More Cowbell.
I was just going to say that. Loved it. Yes.
Definitely one of the best SNL sketches that there has ever been.
Did you watch the half-hour special just about that? That's in Peacock.
I did.
Oh my God.
No, but that's great. That's great it's great that exists. But it's not in the same league as Who's on First, no pun intended, in terms of like great comedy sketches that are going to be repeated like 100 years hence. I don't think so. Maybe Will Ferrell will be remembered as a comedian in 100 years, but I'm not sure about the sketches themselves.
I know. I was thinking when I put together a list of my top 10 favorite cast members and some of my favorite writers from the show, and that was so difficult. Whereas I could probably do that pretty easily with favorite episodes, just because I feel like what sticks in my memory is more about their body of work. Like I think of Tina Fey and her body of work, and I think, she's an all-time great, like hands down, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Not Victoria Jackson and her body of work, even though she's just as funny to sort of look at and, just talks in a silly way.
She was okay.
She was one note.
She was one note, yeah.
But when she hit. The thing is...
That's true.
Toon sits the driving cat.
I mean, we need to talk about the cast members that didn't work. Because there's a lot of cast members, like there are a litany of great ones, but there is a catalog of cast members that didn't work. But for me, going back and watching some of them, because I powered through some sketches that didn't hit, and I want to understand why they didn't hit. The cast members are kind of okay. Like they're not bad. It's the writing that fails them. But the cast members are oftentimes pretty decent in my eyes. It's oftentimes the writing that fails them. But really what you get with Black Jeopardy or something like that, my favorite sketch, or Celebrity Jeopardy, my second favorite sketch, is you get a melding of really, really good talent, really good writers, but you have talent that's able to transcend the writing and bring the writing into a whole nother realm. Whereas certain cast members are just not able to transcend like that. And those are the ones who oftentimes kind of fall off.
I've noticed if there's a cast member who seems kind of unremarkable, it's because they're a writer. It's because they're a good writer. So Andrew Desmukes is somebody in the current cast who does not have that, like, you just look at him and it's funny. Like a great, but he is a writer and he can do some good stuff. So, he had a recent thing. Go ahead. Yeah. Seth Meyers, he talked about that a lot, and he was a big performer in Chicago, and he's done a ton of improv and all that kind of stuff. And for whatever reason, he was hired on SNL, and on his on-camera stuff, when he was in sketches, not Weekend Update, but when he was in sketches, he just kind of disappeared into the scenery, But as a writer, we know that he was fantastic, and he's also been very successful with what he does doing the Late Show. But I just thought that was so interesting. Even though he didn't really work in the way that he had hoped maybe that he would work on the show, he had to pivot, and it was a good pivot. And he ended up having a fantastic career, and he could be running SNL after Lauren, decides to leave.
SNL is really not kind to... I don't mean this in terms of sexuality, but straight men, in the comedic sense. I mean, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like the big names, like the people who are remembered and the people who are remembered as great performers, are always the wacky ones, not the straight men who you need in the sketch reacting against the wackiness in order to make that work.
Oh, you're right. I mean, but is that a comedy thing?
I'm just feeling bad for Seth Meyers at this point, because I imagine that was what his role was in those sketches.
We shouldn't feel bad for Seth Meyers. I think he's okay.
He's doing fine.
Jason Sudeikis, when he was on the show, was mostly that. And it's only because he's done Ted Lasso and things since then that now he just seems like this amazing, larger than life thing that came out of the show. Yeah, or just looking at the current cast. So Mikey Day is another one of those, like, you just look at him and he just is funny looking. Or Beck Bennett, I was thinking, as from the recent previous cast, is another one who just will play like the asshole in so many things. Both of whom can serve as straight men.
You know what, though? You look at somebody like Kenan Thompson, who is legend. He's been around the longest, and he is so good. He is such a good utility player in the best possible way, because he can be anything. He can play any status. He can play big. He can go small. He can be wacky and crazy. And he can also be the straight man. Like, I feel like that kind of versatility is what plays the best. Even though, when you think of these big characters like John Belushi or Chris Farley or something, their versatility, I think that they're limited. They obviously did eventually run out of gas at a very young age. But you see somebody like Kenan Thompson, who is and Phil Hartman had the same kind of thing. He could be anything.
Kenan Thompson feels really unique because he's the only SNL cast member I can think of. And again, I don't know nearly as many as there are, but he's the only one I can think of who had a career before he started SNL.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And that probably explains why he's stuck around as long as he has, because he knows he's onto a good thing, and he knows the other side of the grass isn't necessarily greener. But yeah, maybe it explains his unique place, as well as like the fact that he is that versatile and that effortlessly good. He seems just like he's just a pro.
He is.
His continued presence, I feel like, is a joke on the show in itself, and that people should not stick around in general that long. He should be the exception, the one person who's allowed to stay around forever. This was something, right? Again, I watched during Billy Crystal, who was only on for a year. Lenny from Lenny and Squiggy. What's his name? Anyway, there were a bunch of people that there were quick turnaround casts back in those days.
Yeah. And
so that's what I expected. You know, if you're a steady watcher of the show, you still get quite a few episodes out of these people because they're long seasons. It's a lot of material, especially somebody like Billy Crystal, who's on screen so long, that I'm not as crazy about the more recent thing where people are just, oh, well, you have to be like 2 years as a featured player, and then you get to be in the cast, and then you probably last, 5+ years. And it just seems like I would like it to be more dynamic than that. Although I understand how maybe this is like putting on more established musical guests. It's just easing up the break in terms of playing on hard mode, right? If you have new people every year, that is making it that the audience is going to have to develop a relationship
all over again. Yeah.
That's true.
It just makes it much harder for the show to stick. So I guess this is one of the things they've had to do to just like make it more of an establishment that people want to continue, that it's not about this shop that is chewing people up and spitting them out every year.
But that was a 1-year contract. Like players like Lenny, I can't remember his name either, or Billy Crystal were already famous.
Michael McKean, sorry.
Thank you. Michael McKean, who's wonderful, long career. But they were already known players, Steve Martin's partner now. What's,
Martin Short. Yeah,
Martin Short,
SCTV
thank you.
people.
He was on SCTV. There's, so there are people who are coming on to SNL for these really short periods, but they were already established. It wasn't like you were, this brand new. Even Eddie Murphy, he was so young when he first started at SNL, and he was a complete unknown, even though he had been doing stand-up and stuff in high school. But he was still a relative unknown, and he stuck around for a few years. I think it's just those established players can get in with a 1-year contract, whereas if you come in as kind of a nobody, you're stuck with a longer contract.
One thing I keep thinking about when people keep praising Lorne Michaels' eye for talent, clearly he does know a good performer when he sees one. But also, if you're like offering people who are trying to become professional comedians in New York City a steady job for at least 1 year, then you are going to get a lot of very good talent coming through your audition.
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt.
And maybe one of the reasons why it's changed more recently is that, like previously, SNL was a place where talent would go to break through, but now it's so high status that, as you say, Sarah, you need chops already in order to be able to get there. So its place in the scene is a little bit different. And now, obviously, if you're trying to break through to comedy, you go online.
That's so true.
Or you go join, Dropout or Smosh or one of these online independent comedy networks.
I wouldn't be surprised post Lorne Michaels if we see more people joining the cast like Michael McKean, because that was not a Lorne Michaels hire. That was during the off years.
That's right.
And that's why he fired all of these seasoned people to get that Anthony Michael Hall cast of like really young people, which, took a year to actually become something good.
I love hearing stories about where he goes to pick talent. So he'll come to improv, theaters. He'll come to Second City or Improv Olympic, or what's the one in New York City?
UCB.
UCB. Thank you. Or he'll look for stand-ups, and I just think that that's so interesting because when you're doing improv, you're part of a team and you're a team player and you're used to kind of ceding the spotlight to someone else sometimes, playing the straight man sometimes, being the funny one the other times. Whereas a stand-up, I would think if you've got a cast full of stand-ups, how difficult that would be.
It's got to be hard.
I think that would just be so difficult. And I wondered if that off season, Mark, was it because that was when stand-up was really, really hot, if he had this cast full of stand-ups or mostly stand-ups, why the whole vibe of the group they never really gelled.
Yeah, I think that's been an element from the beginning of getting stand-ups.
Yeah.
Because they do work in some ways, and certainly having those, during Weekend Update where they have, I forget what the technical term is, but the Emily Litella, they'll go to somebody who gets to address the camera, and they're playing a character, or maybe they're playing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what I was referring to, of like, oh, Andrew Desmukes is actually okay, even though he's, very forgettable in sketches. Yeah, so it's always just been a combination, but certainly you need a lot of those heavy character. The character stuff is what it's known for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the people that can do that. So have people like tried to keep up with the current season and actually made themselves? Because when I just I recognize, besides Keegan Thompson, almost none of these people. And it took me an episode or two before I'm like, do I like Marcelo Hernandez? Like, okay, actually, I think he's pretty good. But like, I wasn't sold on a lot of these immediately. And in fact, I feel like in general, the women in the recent casts have been stronger than the men. Like,
I agree.
It's not from the Andy Samberg period where there were all these great men in a row. Now it's like the Heidi Gardner and Ego Nwodum, like these seem, apart from Keegan Thompson, to be the ones that stick out
Chloe
the most
Fineman,
for me. Yes.
Sarah Sherman.
Yes.
They're really funny. He's got a really good crop of women.
As I said, it depends upon if a particular sketch kind of breaks through. That's why because I'm just not watching whole episodes. That's just not what breaks through to me. And so the episodes that tend to break through are the ones that have particularly big talent, So the Michael Che's and is it Michael Che? Michael Che?
Michael Che.
Yeah.
But like,
which he mostly just does update. He's just a writer.
That's what I'm saying. So like those kinds of weekend updates, those things kind of break through. The Keegan Thompson stuff, that breaks through. Black Jeopardy, that stuff breaks through. But mini sketches really don't.
I think we're seeing your YouTube algorithm, Lawrence. I think.
I really kind of gravitate towards the black stuff.
Yes, we are. But we are all individually served up the stuff that is similar to what we've been watching before. Yeah.
Indeed. So maybe that's what's going on. But yeah, I tried to watch an episode to kind of get ready for this, and it was kind of a slog. I didn't like it very much. And so I was like, well, screw this. And I started watching old stuff, and I was like, this is the real crack. This is the high quality stuff here, right? For me, it's always going to be a show that has a great deal of replayability and watchability because of the great stuff they've done in the past. The most recent things, there's some hits here and there, but not nearly as consistent as they were in the past.
Is this just, I think in the popular culture, everybody right here, I think this is cliche by now, everybody just thinks their generation, when they were in college, whatever that cast is, that was the best cast. And now the show sucks and everybody
disagree.
You think it's objective that you are rising above your particular identity.
What I'm saying is that I really like the old stuff. Like I like Chevy Chase. I like Jim Belushi. I like,
Jim Belushi.
Older things. Jim was in the cast and was one in those interim casts. But
Jim Belushi is still alive.
Yes.
Okay, the guy who's dead. Belushi, okay, yes. How about that? The dead Belushi. I probably shouldn't say that. But I really like that older stuff. I really genuinely like it. Going back and watching the old Steve Martin stuff, really, really good. So I begin to realize that maybe I just have an old soul. Maybe I have a Jimi Hendrix thing about me. I don't know. I really enjoyed that older stuff.
Sure.
Far more than I like the 90s.
When we had the Steve Martin episode, in fact, my sister called you. He doesn't even know that Steve Martin wasn't a cast member, but some of these people have been on so often that you could go on like an Alec Baldwin trip of just watching clips of Alec Baldwin. He's been on so many times. Tom Hanks. Actually, in prep for this, I watched like 3 different Tom Hanks episodes from the time over. It's almost as if they were cast members because they were on so damn often.
I just want to try and blow Lawrence's mind. So you're saying that you prefer the old stuff. I put it to you that you prefer watching individual clips, which are going to be good, rather than the full episode. And that's the big difference. It's not that I think it's probably the case that the overall quality of episode hasn't really gone down over the last 30, 40 years. And the issue is it has always been a slog to sit through an entire episode of SNL, would be my guess. And the thing that you're not enjoying is having to wade through 20 minutes of mediocre material to get to one decent sketch.
Try watching that episode 1. That
you might be right.
I was just about to say that. Did anybody watch the first ever episode?
No, I didn't.
I saw bits of it.
Oh God!
Was it that bad? Was it terrible?
It was really different. I mean, there are certain things that were the same, but I was kind of struck by how many different musical acts were kind of dotted throughout. So it wasn't just the same artist. They would have, I think it was 3 different musical artists. Wasn't that true, Mark? Is that right?
Yeah, and Carlin wasn't in any of the sketches because he was too on coke.
God.
So it wasn't
Carlin.
like that wasn't even the intention. It was just a weird thing. They just wanted you to get the show out. You know, we haven't even mentioned that one of the impetus for doing this was that movie that is describing how this, and it makes it so much more exciting than the episode, if you just see it in isolation, actually is. So even though I don't think it was an amazing film, like it did sort of hype me up. You know, it was made by a fanboy about this.
Yeah.
And it's always just fun seeing, I don't know, maybe you guys think it's actually just disrespectful or something, but seeing actors even just trying in the ads, like, wait, who's that supposed to be? That's supposed to be Dan Aykroyd? Like, I just find that fun. I don't know. So I enjoyed the film, and it made me appreciate the first episode more, even though, again, I had seen it a few years ago when I got the DVDs, and it made me like not want to watch anymore. It was a very big slog.
Dan Aykroyd, another really good cast member.
We could do a whole Dan Aykroyd deep dive in terms of like, he was a great cast member, but did his comedic sensibilities hold up over time? That if you look at some of the movies that he eventually did, like
maybe not.
After Trading Places and Ghostbusters.
Blues Brothers is really good, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we need to talk about Blues Brothers because it's probably the single best thing that's ever come out of SNL.
I completely agree. Blues Brothers, I went back and watched that because they did an episode about it on the Rewatchables. And I went back and watched that. That thing is amazing. I didn't appreciate, because I hadn't seen it for like 20 years. Watching it now as like a mature, intellectual film critic, I was like, wow, this movie's really good. Like, legitimately great.
Wait, are you saying that that's better than Night at the Roxbury? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, I am. I am saying that. Definitively,
Weird.
yes.
Okay, all right. You're entitled to your opinion.
Has anyone gone back and rewatched? Like, I really watched the Wayne's World movies when they came out. I've had no desire to revisit them.
Wayne's World was so good. Yeah, the first
Wayne's
I
World
watched
is
it
the
again.
other thing.
It works. It works. It is still good.
Is it still
still good.
I loved that movie when it came out.
It is definitely better than Night of the Roxbury. I tell you that shit.
What about Coneheads?
It is not.
Did they make a movie out of
Coneheads
that?
is so good. Coneheads.
I'm looking at a list.
It was so
1993, 1994. It's Pat. That was a film.
Oh,
Talk
good
about
God.
problematic
that was not
sketches.
good.
Now
That was not good. That didn't work out. Though.
Stuart Saves His Family, 1995.
Yeah. Ladies Man, they did a movie about the Ladies Man.
That Ladies Man. Now that was my shit, boy. I love that movie.
Well, it can't all be good.
Okay, we're wrapping up. We got to do it. Like, Mark has not told us to do this. We got to do it. Our favorite cast members, our favorite sketches. What are we doing here, guys? We cannot leave the people. This is what they want. That's why they're listening to us. They need to know favorite cast members, favorite sketches, recommendations. That's what they want to know. So they can go down the rabbit hole.
I'm going to go first because I've got the smallest pool to draw from, probably. So in terms of cast members, just all the ones I've heard of. They're all real funny. I love, like, Tina Fey. I love John Mulaney. I love.
Come on, man. Come on, man.
I don't know enough to be that picky. Like, any of the cast members that I've heard of are going to be great. I know that Chris Farley is legendary as a cast member, but I honestly don't understand why, because I just haven't seen enough of the show. But, I love, Will Ferrell.
He was great. He didn't make my top 10, though.
No? Will Ferrell will probably make mine. John Belushi, but mainly because I know him from the Blues Brothers. Sketches, though. Cowbell is probably probably close tie for my favorite SNL sketch would be Cowbell and The Killing, Andy Samberg, and What You Say. Do we know this one? It's become an incredible meme.
The Killing? What?
You're looking at me with blank faces.
What's that? What is it? Who is in it?
Describe a little more.
What era?
Is it a film?
Yeah, I don't know that one.
Yeah, it's an Andy Samberg sketch, but Bill Hader. It's a pre-recorded, and Andy Samberg comes into a room, there's a little conversation, and then Bill Hader shoots him, and then there's a short piece of music, which is, what you say, oh, that you only meant well, 'cause you did. And then that goes on for a couple of seconds. And then Bill Hader gets shot by someone else who has also come into the scene. And then and then the same music plays. And that happens like 6 times in a row. And it is intensely funny. And it's based on a scene from the OC. I don't know if anyone remembers that show, but they did that scene. And then Saturday Night Live did this sketch. And then it's just become an internet meme.
All right. Well, we will link to it because this is not even ringing a bell with me.
I know, me either.
I'm amazed that you guys don't know it.
It sounds like a precursor for Barry is what it sounds like.
I've also got to give a shout out to The Lonely Island because Captain Jack Sparrow, like all of the Lonely Island songs are fantastic.
Really good. Really good.
I want to do a shout out for this. I did a little of my prep listening to this. Wasn't That Special 50 Years of SNL podcast. So it's 2 guys that they actually, for each episode, they listen to a whole season and they go through and they rank which were the best and worst episodes, which were the best and worst sketches. And I only listen to the free episodes. A lot of them, you have to sign up for their Patreon or whatever. But it was a great thing to then drive you to YouTube. Oh, this is a good sketch, and sort of catch up and do a global review, especially, whatever your level of involvement with the show was over the years, to just have somebody really dwell on like the incoming, outgoing cast members and who was the most and least valuable. So that is so foreign to my way of, I don't like to do lists and things. I'm just going to say, as I think this was a Conan O'Brien thing, but the Tune Since the Driving Cat, I'm just going to say this stupid sketch from long ago is one of the things that immediately comes to mind. Most of the things that I love most about Saturday Night Live are about nostalgia. So I also like all these John Lovitz created, acting or, that's the ticket, like these are the things that really came to mind for me.
Phrases.
Oh my goodness.
And of course, Fan Down the River. It's, it's the same things that everybody else praises.
That was really good.
There's a reason that these have risen to the top of the crop and, are things that are like Cowbell that are repeated over and over again, which I saw Cowbell when it happened.
Yeah.
And I just thought like, okay, this is a good sketch. But it didn't strike me like this one will resound through history. It's just another sketch.
It's just Christopher Walken. There's so much going on in that sketch. The
so
fact
much.
that it's Bruce Dickinson and everyone's like, it's Bruce Dickinson. And only about 30% of the audience are going to understand who Bruce Dickinson is or why it's important that he's there. And like Blue Oyster, was there ever a period in time when Blue Oyster Cult and the fact that they had a cowbell on their song was common enough knowledge to ground that joke?
They said it wasn't actually a cowbell.
Or was it just a cymbal bell?
It was that
a woodblock, or it was
the
written.
Woodblock. Yeah.
That's what the sketch was written as woodblock. Anyway, I don't want to repeat the details of this half-hour special. I just want to refer folks to that, as well as the special about the music on Peacock, where the first part of it is John Batiste, I think, put together this remix of a bunch of different guests, like 2 or 3 at a time, musical guests, their past performances. It's just a masterclass. Just watch the first 12 minutes of that special. Mm-hmm. It is so great. But Sarah, your favorite sketches or people are.
Let's go, Sarah. Let's go.
It's hard. It's so hard. Okay. So yes, going back to the Chris Farley period, even though he didn't make my top 10, that Chippendale sketch with Patrick Swayze still makes me laugh. Dick in a Box still makes me laugh really hard. But I think one of the most recent sketches that I loved and made me feel seen as a mom was that Christmas Morning film where it's Kristen Wiig who gets a robe and everybody else is getting all of these fantastic presents. And she still keeps repeating, "Oh, I got a robe." And anyway, that one just really stuck with me as well. I love Kristen Wiig.
I really hope your family doesn't hear
No.
about that because
we all saw it together.
They're giving you bad gifts.
No, they don't. But actually, we did all see it together, and both my daughter and Josh both looked at me because I was the one who was laughing the hardest out of that. And they were like, "Oh,
that's a public service message." Yes, that is the point. It explicitly says at the end, like,
as you were saying,
"Come on." Your mom put Christmas together for you.
They are, for the record, they are great. They give good holiday gifts.
They give lovely robes. Okay, so real fast, Eddie Murphy, of course, love Eddie Murphy. Word association, probably my favorite one, having watched a whole bunch of those. one that I'm going to say that probably might slip through the cracks, but I really appreciated Gilda Radner. Really loved her.
Why haven't we been talking about her? You are right.
Really loved it. And every single time I saw her, I was like, wow, she's really good. She was amazing. I loved her.
For sure.
That's it.
She was in the top 3 for original cast members. In terms of she was definitely one of the funniest things in the show.
She was absolutely.
But she was really, really good. And I don't think people talk enough about her. She was really good.
Oh, she was so good.
I had to go through watching random things and just happened upon her. And I was like, wow. She's really, really amazing.
I think it's because she didn't go on to have a huge legacy, partially because she died so early. But even before that,
she died so young.
Like she was in some movies with her husband, Gene Wilder, and they were not that memorable. You can't tell me what they are right now. So that tells me.
I feel like she was made for the sketch form. Like you talk about what's the ratio of good sketches to bad sketches in any given show? You put that ratio on Gilda Radner, and she is such a high ratio of greatness. She really was just so good on that show in that particular format.
All right. Well, we have gone over time. Maybe some of us will do a little after talking.
Yeah, we can have to talk. Sarah has to go. So bye, Sarah.
Bye, you guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Until next time.
Pretty Much Pop is part of the Partially Examined Life Podcast Network. Get more Pretty Much Pop at prettymuchpop.com. Get bonus content for every episode at patreon.com/prettymuchpop.